Billionaire CEO used me as a trophy wife. Now I own his empire and his secrets. I love you." Those 3 words fell into the silence like glass. He didn't flinch. He just looked at her, cold, detached, and said, "Why would you say that?" Lillian froze. Because her husband, the man she married to save her family, was checking his phone on the night his mistress announced her pregnancy. And just like that, she realized she had become nothing more than a name on a contract, a placeholder wife. Her best friend carried his child. But what happens when the girl who was never supposed to matter becomes the biggest threat to everything they built? Love isn't part of the contract. That was the first rule Lillian Klein remembered when she signed her name on the marriage certificate. And the second rule? Don't ask questions you don't want answered. But she broke both. And now, standing in the center of a penthouse with glass walls, a designer gown clinging to her frame, and a heart breaking beneath layers of composure, Lillian realized she never stood a chance. Her marriage to Asher Klein wasn't a love story, it was an exchange. He needed a wife to secure his inheritance. She needed protection for a family business that was drowning in debt and scandal. Cold, efficient, perfectly rehearsed. He was the heir to Klein Enterprises, New York's golden boy, powerful, calculating, and unbothered by headlines that painted him as a heartless billionaire. He thrived on control. She was a reporter who had once chased truth like it could save her life, until truth cost her everything. Now she stood next to a man who only looked at her when the cameras were watching, and never once when her heart was bleeding. For a while, she told herself that was fine. She played the role, the elegant wife, the polished socialite, the silent ornament on his arm at family galas. But no matter how many designer dresses she wore, how many toasts she raised with red lips and champagne fingers, she was invisible. Till the day she wasn't. The moment everything changed. It was supposed to be just another charity gala. Until Trixie, her best friend since childhood, showed up in a fitted red dress, glowing and smug. Lillian's stomach twisted, and something about the way Trixie clung to Asher's side, and the way Asher didn't flinch when she kissed his cheek, and the way his hand lingered on her waist, the way the whispers rippled through the crowd like a slow earthquake. Then came the announcement, unceremonious and cruel. "Ashura and I are expecting." Trixie's voice was soft. Her hand rested over her stomach with theatrical grace. Asher's silence said it all. Lillian's world didn't just crack, it fractured. But she didn't. Instead, she smiled, lifted her glass, and said, "Well, I suppose we should invite her over for family dinner. Wouldn't want to keep the in-laws waiting." The room fell into stunned silence. Only Asher knew what that smile really meant. Lillian had been cornered. And now? Now she was going to set the whole house on fire. Not just a wife. Not anymore. Behind closed doors, Lillian confronted Asher. "You used me," she said. "You used me right back," he answered coldly. "Don't pretend you were innocent." And he was right. That boy could be both guilty of something. But what Asher hadn't counted on was her changing. He married a woman who followed rules. He forgot that she once chased stories that exposed kings. She had teeth, and she was done pretending to smile. Enter James Romeo. When Lillian first met James, she didn't even know who he was. She mistook him for a flirt at a luxury rooftop party, cool, confident, charming in that disarmingly careless way. "Looking for a call boy?" he teased. She smirked. "You offering?" What she didn't know, James Romeo was the billionaire CEO of the Romero tech empire, and her accidental flirtation became front-page gossip. But James didn't walk away. Instead, he looked at her like she wasn't a scam. Where Asher brought control, James brought chaos. Where Asher withheld, James invited. And where Asher made her feel small, James made her feel seen. His stakes rise. Caught between a crumbling marriage, a media empire she once loved, and a child that wasn't hers, but should have been, Lillian made a choice. She wasn't going to leave quietly. Not when she had been the one to protect Asher's legacy during every scandal. Not when she had given up her dreams to become the woman his world demanded. And not when she finally realized that the only person who had ever really chosen her was the one she was never supposed to fall for. This wasn't a love story. Until it was. From poker games with billionaires to boardroom betrayals. From anonymous tip-offs to public humiliation. Lillian had weathered it all. But now, standing on the edge of everything she thought she wanted, she faced a new kind of risk. What if love was never about being chosen? What if it was about choosing someone, even after they'd hurt you? Even after you'd hurt yourself? Asher had always said, "This is just business." But Lillian had learned something else. A heart doesn't play by contracts. And love doesn't need permission. It just shows up. Uninvited, unapologetic. Sometimes, right when you're about to walk away. Chapter 1. The Wife He Forgot to Love. The first time Lillian Klein realized she'd become invisible was not when Asher kissed Trixie in front of her. It was the morning after. He was sipping his espresso in the sunlit kitchen of their penthouse, reading stock reports on his tablet as if the betrayal hadn't echoed through their marriage like a detonated landmine. She stood at the kitchen island in silence, waiting for him to say something. Anything. He didn't even glance up. "You're quiet," he said casually, flipping to the next screen. "Everything okay?" Lillian blinked. "You let her announce she's pregnant. Your mistress, in front of your entire family." Asher didn't flinch. He took another sip of espresso. Technically, she announced it in front of the Romeros. That was a business dinner, not family. The room went still. The glass in her hand trembled, but she didn't let it fall, not yet. "You don't get to draw lines like that, Asher." Now he looked up. Cool, calm, tired of the drama before it had even begun. "Lillian, we both knew what this was when we signed those papers. You needed status. I needed an heir, or at least a wife who looked like one, and we made it work, for a while, until she came along." He didn't answer, because silence was easier than guilt, and cheaper than an apology. A marriage built on sand. Lillian walked into her home office later that day and pulled open the drawer that held her marriage contract. A leather folder, a gold clip, a dozen pages detailing the terms of their agreement. One clause stood out in bold. Emotional entanglement is not required or encouraged. The arrangement will remain strictly transactional for the agreed-upon term. She remembered when she first read that line. How cold it sounded. How reasonable it had seemed. How naive she had been. Because somewhere along the way, she had gotten emotionally entangled. It wasn't his looks or his wealth. It was the way Asher had once said, "You don't have to impress me, just survive." Back then, she thought he saw her. Her eyes, how she knew better. He saw through her. Like glass. Trixie wasn't the first lie, just the loudest. The affair had begun before their wedding anniversary. Lillian only noticed because Trixie's perfume lingered in the elevator, the one only Asher used after business hours. At first she told herself it didn't mean anything, that maybe Trixie had stopped by to drop something off. A tie. But the texts came next. Then the missed dinners. Then the late-night calls with Asher whispering in the guest bathroom. Lillian had suspected. But she didn't confront. She waited. Because sometimes the truth is more painful when it's confirmed. The night she broke in silence. It wasn't a scream, or a slap, or a dramatic exit. It was a whisper in the dark, the night he returned at 2:41 IME. The smell of wine and perfume clinging to his shirt like guilt. "Do you even remember I'm your wife?" Asher paused at the doorway, his silhouette barely outlined in the moonlight. "You're still awake. You were supposed to be home hours ago. I had a meeting. You were with her? He didn't respond. She sat on the edge of the bed, arms folded tight, voice shaking. I can handle betrayal, Asher, but this forgetting? I don't think I can do that anymore. He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. You want to talk about forgetting? You forgot who you were the minute you took my last name. She stood. That was the moment something inside her shifted. The version of herself who had accepted the cold dinners, the fake smiles at events, the whispers behind her back, she began to burn. I didn't forget, she said slowly. I sacrificed. There's a difference. He looked at her, eyes half-lidded as if bored by the weight of the moment. And what do you want now? Revenge? Sympathy? I want my name back, she whispered. The birth of the woman he couldn't control. The next morning, Lillian walked into the dining room wearing a silk black jumpsuit and heels that echoed like thunder across the marble floor. She didn't look like the silent wife anymore. She looked like a woman who remembered who she was. At breakfast, Asher's mother raised her brow and said, "You look different." Lillian smiled and replied, "That's because I'm not pretending anymore." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned to Asher and handed him a folder. Divorce terms, just in case you change your mind. He blinked, caught off guard for the first time in months. She leaned in close enough that only he could hear her. I know you don't want me, fine, but don't mistake me for the woman you married out of convenience. I won't be erased quiet. And she walked away, leaving the scent of freedom behind her. But freedom comes at a cost. That night, she didn't cry. She opened a bottle of wine, called her sister, and booked a segment for her celebrity gossip news show. To air Asher's secrets. To rebuild her own name. Because the world might remember her as Mrs. Klein. But after tonight, they'd remember her as something else. The wife he forgot to love, who didn't forget how to fight. Chapter 2. The Mistress, the Media, and the Billionaire. It started with a headline. Billionaire heir returns from the UK with a woman who might not be his wife. Text. Where is Mrs. Klein? And who is the blonde by his side? Lillian stared at the screen in the studio green room. The headline flashed in bold above a photo of Asher at the airport, Trixie leaning on his arm, a coy smile on her face as if she owned the world, and the man next to her. But the press didn't know who Trixie was. Yet. 10 seconds to air, the producer called. Lillian Klein adjusted her mic, brushed a hand down her blazer, and stared into the camera with the calm precision of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Her voice came out even, cool, measured. Good evening and welcome to Celebrity Exclusive. I'm your host, Lillian Klein. Tonight we're tracking the secret lives of the elite, including a mysterious woman seen with one of the country's most eligible billionaires. Asher's photo filled the screen. Lillian didn't blink. Say she's a friend. Others claim she's more. And one source tells us his actual wife may be preparing to disappear. No one else in the room noticed her fingers clenched tight under the desk, because the mistress had entered the spotlight. And the real wife? And she had just entered the war. Trixie, the best friend who knew where to stab. The next morning, Lillian stepped out of her building only to be ambushed by paparazzi. Mrs. Klein, did you know your husband was traveling with another woman? Do you plan to make a public statement? Will you be attending the Romero Gala with Mr. Klein? She smiled politely, stepping into the black car waiting curbside. She didn't say a word. But her silence said everything. Inside the car, her assistant handed her a tablet. I compiled the Trixie file, she said quietly. Lillian scrolled. Photos, messages, hotel reservations, even a hidden camera snap from her own engagement party. Trixie's hand on Asher's lower back when no one was watching. You were my maid of honor, Lillian whispered to herself, and the whole time you were already planning to be his mistress. Her phone vibrated. Asher. She let it ring. Then swiped it into voicemail. She called again. And like him always did, when they realized the woman they underestimated had become the woman they feared. Meanwhile, the media took sides. The tabloids exploded. Mrs. Klein's stone-cold silence is a masterclass in elegant revenge. Is the real power in the Klein family the woman behind the mic? Mystery Mistress identified as socialite Trixie Moore. Suddenly, Lillian's ratings were soaring. Her show became the most unwatched program in its slot. Women tuned in not just to hear the gossip, but to watch how Lillian handled it. Gracefully, strategically, with the kind of unshakable poise that only came from heartbreak forged into armor. At home, the penthouse turned colder. Asher didn't speak when she walked into the room. Neither did she. They became shadows passing in silk hallways, speaking only in clipped phrases. Morning. Hunting at 8. Dinner's cancelled. And sometimes, late at night, he would glance at her across the room. But by then, she was already looking away. James Romeo enters the game. The Romero Gala arrived like a storm, with diamond heels and champagne fountains. It was supposed to be Asher's opportunity to restore the family image. Instead, it became Lillian's stage. She walked into the ballroom, wearing a black velvet gown that dipped just low enough to whisper danger. Her hair pulled into a classic chignon and a diamond choker she hadn't worn since her wedding night. Asher saw her from across the room and stopped mid-sentence. So did everyone else. Trixie, dressed in pale pink like an afterthought, gripped his arm. But his eyes stayed locked on Lillian. She passed them both without a glance. And then, a deep voice beside her. "Mrs. Klein, you dance like you're used to being watched." She turned. James Romeo. The elusive billionaire bachelor, grandson of Grandma Romero, silent partner in multiple elite ventures. Also, the man she had once accidentally flirted with, thinking he was a bartender. Tonight, he wore midnight like a suit. "Mr. Romeo," she said with a smile. "I hear you're looking for a call boy." And she nearly laughed. "Depends. Can you keep up?" He extended a hand. "Try me." They danced. And the cameras ate it up. So did Trixie's glare. So did Asher's clenched jaw. Because for the first time, someone was watching her. The mistress makes her move. Later that night, in the powder room lined with gold-framed mirrors, Trixie cornered her. "Do you think this changes anything?" she hissed. "You dancing with James like some headline act?" Lillian didn't blink. "You're already in enough headlines for both of us." Trixie stepped closer. "You're not the victim here, Lil. You married him for status, same as me. I just wasn't stupid enough to fall for him." That stung more than Lillian wanted to admit. "Tell me, Trixie," she said softly, "when he leaves you too, and he will, what are you going to use to buy back your self-respect?" Trixie sneered. "At least I'll have his child." Lillian's smile faltered, but only slightly. And then she whispered the one thing Trixie didn't expect. "No. Why if the paternity test says otherwise?" The color drained from Trixie's face. Lillian walked out before she could recover. Because in the game of love and lies, information is always the deadliest weapon. The night ends with a choice. Later, as the gala dimmed and the city lights flickered below, Asher found Lillian alone on the terrace. "You were incredible tonight," he said quietly. She didn't respond. "James Romeo, he's dangerous." "And so am I," she said. He reached for her wrist. She pulled back. "Lynn, I didn't mean for this to get this far." "You didn't mean to get caught." He paused. "She doesn't mean anything." Lillian looked at him then. For the first time in weeks, really looked. "You had the power to choose me, every day, and every day you didn't." He opened his mouth, but she wasn't done. "I'm not angry anymore, Asher. I'm just done negotiating my worth." Then she walked away. Not because she had somewhere to be, but because she finally remembered who she was. Not just a wife. Not just a host. Not a victim. Not a headline. But the storm behind the story. And tonight, the story was hers. Chapter 3. When the past comes back wearing his smile. The first time Lillian saw him again, he was standing at the bar in a charcoal gray suit, holding a lowball glass of whiskey like it belonged to him. Same posture. Same stillness. Same crooked smile she once called home. It had been 5 years. 5 long, unforgiving years. But there he was. Owen Pearce. The man who broke her before Asha ever learned her name. He froze. The gala's music faded into white noise, her breath caught somewhere between memory and regret. She hadn't even realized she was walking toward him until his eyes met hers, those familiar, storm-colored eyes that always seemed to see more than she wanted to share. "Lillian?" he said softly, as if it hadn't been 5 years, as if they hadn't destroyed each other. "Asher's wife," she corrected with a brittle smile. "You might have read the headlines." Owen chuckled, low, apologetic. "I saw the one about you and the mystery billionaire." His gaze flicked briefly toward James Romeo. Lillian raised a brow. "You always did confuse arrogance with charm. You always did confuse control with love." "Ah, touché." 5 years ago, she waited for him at the airport. He never showed. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't leave a note. She had a plane ticket to Paris and a heart packed like luggage. And Owen Pearce had disappeared. Lillian never got an explanation, only a voicemail 3 days later. "I'm sorry, I can't. I thought I could, but I can't." She deleted it. But the silence stayed. It carved itself into her bones. By the time Asher Klein came along, she didn't believe in romantic rescue stories. She believed in contracts, in terms, in control. It was safer that way. Till now. Until Owen walked back in, wearing the same damn smile that used to make her believe anything was possible. Chapter 4. The Threat in a Designer Dress. Trixie Moore didn't knock when she arrived. She never did. She breezed into the Klein penthouse as if she owned the floor beneath her heels, hips swaying like a threat, a designer dress hugging her figure like a weapon. Her red lipstick matched her mood, bold, unapologetic, and dangerous. Lillian didn't rise from the velvet armchair where she sat, coffee cup in hand, a news headline blinking on her tablet. The Mistress and the Millionaire, inside the tangle of the Klein empire. Trixie dropped her clutch on the marble countertop like a gauntlet. "We need to talk." Lillian lifted her eyes slowly, calm, unshaken. "You're trespassing. Again." Trixie smirked. "You're not the only one who lives here. Yet I'm the only one who belongs here." That landed. For a second, just a flicker, Trixie's perfect composure cracked, but she recovered quickly. "I'm pregnant." "I've heard." "It's Asher's." Lillian leaned back in her chair. "Then why do you look terrified every time someone mentions a paternity test?" Trixie's lips parted. "You wouldn't dare." I already did." And snake meets queen. Trixie circled the room, heels clicking against imported Italian tile, every step calculated to show power. But Lillian didn't need to walk. She owned the space by sitting still. "I gave him something you couldn't," Trixie said, voice low and venomous. Lillian met her eyes. "An exploration date?" Trixie laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You can act cold, but we both know you still love him." Lillian's silence said more than denial ever could. And that was what made Trixie snap? "You think you're untouchable now because of that little poker game with James Romeo? You're playing dress-up in a world—" Lillian stood slowly. Not angrily. Not dramatically. But like someone preparing to bury a body with words alone. "You're right," she said, voice quiet. "I was a placeholder for a woman with real power, with real grace, and with just enough silence to burn men like you and Asher in a single headline. Trixie froze. Lillian stepped closer. I'm not fighting for him anymore. I'm fighting for me. And if you think I won't burn this house down just to watch you run barefoot through the ashes, you don't know me at all. Asher walks in. The elevator pinged. Asher stepped into the room, phone in hand, tie loosened, brow furrowed. He froze at the sight of them, his mistress and his wife facing off like a war council. Am I interrupting? He asked. Trixie softened instantly. Asher. She threatened me. Olivian didn't look away. I warned you. Asher looked between them. Hey, give us a moment. She hesitated. But, you know. She grabbed her clutch, air heavy with fury, and stormed out, slamming the door. Silence. Lillian turned toward the window. The city stretched out before them like a battlefield she'd already survived. You always defend her, she said quietly. Asher exhaled. You always attack first. She turned, slowly. I never attacked. I endured. There's a difference. He took a step closer, but she didn't back away. I didn't ask for any of this to get so complicated, he said. No, she said, eyes sharp. You just didn't stop it. A deal of her own. Lillian crossed to the bookshelf, pulled out a thin leather folder and handed it to him. He opened it, skimmed the first page, froze. What is this? A revised contract, she said calmly. If you want to stay married until the board vote, fine, but there will be conditions. His jaw clenched. Conditions? No more Trixie, no more lies, and one press appearance together. You and me, as a united front. If I say no? He stepped closer. Then I release the paternity results and a little timeline of your affair, dated 2 months before our wedding. He stared at her. But this wasn't the woman he married. This was a storm in silk. I'm bluffed. She smiled, tilting her head. Are you willing to find out? The power of letting go. That night, she didn't cry. She walked into her own closet, took off the earrings Asher had once bought her, slipped off the heels that Trixie always tried to outmatch, removed the lipstick, the mask, and stood. Alone, quiet, free. In the mirror was a woman who had once given everything to a marriage that was never built to hold her. Now she was done holding back. Because sometimes, the most dangerous woman in the room isn't the one screaming. It's the one writing the ending, by herself. Chapter 5. The Man Who Saw Her Through the Smoke. The rooftop bar was quiet. Just above the noise of Manhattan, tucked between steel and sky, Lillian stood alone near the glass railing, watching the city glitter like a map of 1,000 unfinished stories. Smoke curled from the end of a stranger's cigar 2 tables down. Jazz played low and slow. She didn't turn when she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't have to. She knew it was him. James Robio didn't announce his presence. He never had to. He brought gravity with him. And quiet. The kind of quiet that asked questions without making a sound. He stopped a few feet behind her. I was wondering when you'd show up again, she said without turning. I was wondering when you'd stop pretending to be fine, he replied. She exhaled, sharp and soft at once. So that's your move? Show up when women are breaking, offer brooding conversation and fine whiskey? Only when they wear heartbreak better than red lipstick. She turned. James stood in a midnight suit, hands in his pockets, eyes on her and only her. He didn't smile. Not yet. Smoke and memory. She walked toward him, heels barely making a sound on the concrete. Why did you find me? He shrugged. You're not as invisible as you think, Lillian. That hit harder than she expected. She dropped her gaze. Then, a beat later, everyone sees me, but no one looks. He stepped closer. I'm not everyone. She looked up. And this time, she let herself believe it. Because James didn't look at her like a wife, or a scandal, or a tragedy wearing pearls. He looked at her like she was the only truth in a room full of performance. The conversation she never knew she needed. They took a table by the corner fire pit. Low flames danced between them like confessions. Lillian sipped her drink slowly, her fingers wrapped around the crystal glass as if it anchored her to something. "I don't know how I got here," she admitted. "I used to know who I was." "You still do," James said. "You just forgot you didn't need anyone's permission to be her." And she laughed under her breath. "And what about you? What's your story, Romeo?" He raised an eyebrow. "Romeo?" She smirked. "Well, you're charming, vaguely tragic and clearly dangerous. Might as well live up to the name." He leaned forward slightly, voice low. "I'm not a romantic." "Noiseless," she teased. "Then why did you dance with me like it meant something?" I paused, and then said quietly, "Because it did." The world blurred for a second. The noise of the city, the lights, the history of everything she had survived, it all quieted. "I'm married," she said like a warning. "I know. Not a good bet, in case you're wondering. There's baggage, scandal, a contract I signed that might just choke me before it's done." He studied her, gaze steady. "We're still sitting here." What he saw in her. She stood and walked back to the edge of the rooftop, letting the wind pull at her hair. James joined her, the space between them electric but respectful. She whispered, "Sometimes I think I stayed with Asher because I didn't believe I was enough without him. And now, I'm starting to believe maybe I always was." James didn't reach for her. He didn't try to save her. He simply said, "That's the version of you I'd bet everything on." She turned to him, eyes rimmed in quiet defiance. "I'm not asking to be saved, James." "Good," he replied, "because I'm not here to rescue you. I'm just here to remind you how much fire you carry in your own hands." What Asher never understood. Asher always liked her when she was quiet. And when she wore muted dresses, smiled politely, agreed in front of his family. He liked her as a trophy, a stabilizer, an accessory in heels. Dame? James watched her burn. And instead of trying to contain her, he admired the blaze. "You asked me once if I was playing games," she said. "I remember." And she stepped closer, her voice suddenly vulnerable. "I don't want to be someone's strategy anymore." "You're not," he said. "You're someone's endgame." She looked at him. And this time, it wasn't fear. It was the quiet, terrifying hope that maybe love didn't always arrive clean. Maybe it sometimes came covered in smoke and ash and scars. I chose you anyway, to ride home. James insisted on walking her to the car. They didn't touch, not even once. But something had changed, and she felt it in the way the night no longer felt cold. "Thank you," she said softly, her hand on the door. "What? You not seeing me as broken?" James stepped closer, voice a whisper now. "You're not broken, Lillian. You're just not finished yet." She swallowed. And for once, she believed him. She slipped into the car, and as it drove away, James stayed standing on the rooftop, watching her. Not like a man waiting to take something from her, but like a man who knew. He'd just seen a woman start to remember what she was worth. Chapter 6. The Man Who Bought Her Silence. The check was already on her nightstand when she walked in. $10 million, 0 cents. Neatly folded in an embossed envelope, placed beside a bouquet of white roses that hadn't bloomed. Asher had always been theatrical with his threats, but this was something colder. This was payment for her pain, a bribe for her dignity. Lillian didn't pick it up. She just stared at it, the the silence of the penthouse closing in like a storm that had long stopped pretending it was rain. She knew what it meant, and spoken too loudly, looked too alive, danced too closely with a man who wasn't Asher Klein. And now he was reminding her of their original terms. This was a transaction. You were never supposed to feel anything. But Asher had forgotten something. Silence comes with a cost, and she had already paid it. It waited in the kitchen like nothing had happened. He didn't look up when she walked in. He just sipped his scotch slowly, scrolling through something on his phone, as if her world hadn't just been boiled down to a line item. "You left me a check," she said, voice even. Asher looked up. "It's yours, no questions asked." Her heels clicked against the floor as she moved closer, every step deliberate. "You think I'd take money for silence?" "No," he said calmly. "I think you'll take it because it's easier than telling the world." The words struck like a slap. But Lillian didn't flinch. 10 million to forget your mistress is carrying your child? Forget we were never real to begin with. And there it was. A final truth in a marriage built on strategy, sealed with cold hands and colder intentions. "You're wrong," she whispered. "I was real, even when I shouldn't have been." Asher poured another drink. "You don't have to justify anything. You won. You outlasted her. She's gone. You're still here. What more do you want?" Lillian stared at him. "I want my name back." The press knew something was off. By morning, the headlines were already whispering. Lillian Klein, seen leaving Klein Tower alone. No ring in sight. Sources say the marriage contract may be unraveling. Is the Ice Queen finally melting? She didn't respond to calls. Not from producers, not from friends, not even from James Romeo, whose name flashed across her phone twice. Instead, she booked a room under an alias at the Langford Hotel. The same place she stayed the week before her wedding. The same room. Suite 702. Back then, she'd stared at her reflection, asking herself one question. Will you survive this? Now she asked a new one. Will you burn it down before it kills you? Agatha called her that evening. Asher's assistant. The one who always knew more than she said. "Mrs. Klein," her voice came cautiously over the line. "There's something you should see." "I'm not interested in more secrets." "It's not a secret, it's a bank transfer. He wired the money to your mother." Lillian went still. "But money?" "To that money meant for you. 10 million. It never went to your account, it went to hers. This morning." Her mouth went dry. "My mother hasn't spoken to me in 2 years." "I know," Agatha said quietly, "but she cashed it anyway." And just like that, Asher hadn't paid for silence. He'd bought betrayal. He hadn't needed to bribe Lillian to keep quiet. He had simply bought the only person who still had the power to wound her. She returned that night, but not for him. She stood in the living room, watching Asher type something on his laptop. He didn't look up. "I see you got the message," he muttered. "I know it when I see it. I got the lesson." He finally met her eyes. I'm done protecting people who buy me to shut me up." She dropped the check on the floor. And then softly, deliberately. "I'm giving the story to Celebrity Exclusive." Asher stood slowly. "You wouldn't." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Already did." The broadcast that broke everything. The episode aired 48 hours later. No dramatic music. No screaming matches. Just Lillian Klein. In a black suit. No ring, no makeup. Just truth. She didn't name names. She didn't have to. She talked about contract marriages. About betrayal. About loving someone who never planned to stay. And about the price women pay for silence. Social media erupted. Some called her brave. Others called her calculated. But everyone was watching. And Asher? Asher watched alone, in a penthouse suddenly too quiet, his glass of scotch untouched. Because for the first time, he had no control over what she did next. Text from James, Romeo. It came at 1:04 a.m. James, you didn't need saving, but I'll stand beside you anyway. She didn't reply. Not right away. She just closed her eyes and breathed. Because for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of being seen. She was afraid of what she might do next, with nothing left to lose. Chapter 7. The Woman the World Finally Saw. They used to call her Mrs. Klein, wife of the heir, the polished woman beside the empire. But now, the world knew her name without the man attached to it. Lillian, just Lillian. And this time, it wasn't a scandal that made them say it, it was strength. After the broadcast, the silence broke like floodgates. Interviews, emails, anonymous women writing in to say, "You spoke the words I never could. We called me crazy. You made me feel sane. You reminded me I was never just a +1. The network offered her a primetime slot. Her ratings shattered records. But it wasn't fame Lillian felt rising around her like light. It was freedom. For the first time in her life, people weren't asking who she was married to. They were asking what she wanted to do next. And the studio was packed. Camera crews, makeup artists, producers buzzing. Everyone wanted a piece of her. Not because she'd cried on camera, but because she hadn't. Because she'd looked into the lens and told the truth. Not with venom, but with clarity. She didn't name Asher. She didn't expose Trixie. She didn't burn the house down. She simply walked out of it, and the sound of her footsteps was louder than any scream. "Are you nervous?" the new producer Cal asked. Lillian adjusted her blazer. "I'm ready." Meanwhile, back at Clean Tower, Asher sat at the edge of his boardroom chair, silent as Grace, his legal counsel, finished reading. "The non-disclosure was nullified," she said, closing the folder. "The non-disclosure was breached, yes, but since it was never signed under free will..." "It doesn't matter," Asher muttered. He stared out the window. Newspapers lined his desk. The voice of a generation of silent women. Lillian Klein. Klein wife no more, but Klein still under her shadow. The board wasn't happy. Investors weren't happy. But the worst part? He had nothing to fight her with. Because she hadn't fought back. She'd simply walked away. Better? An email from someone she never expected. Subject: "We never said goodbye. I'm Owen Pierce." She stared at it for 5 full minutes before opening it. "Lillian, I watched your interview, not because I wanted to relive what I lost, but because I needed to see the woman I once left behind become everything I knew she could be. You don't owe me anything, but I wanted you to know. I left because I didn't believe I deserved you. And I see now, you never needed me to believe it. You were already enough." Oh, she sat with the message a long while. And instead of deleting it, she smiled. Not because it made her feel loved, but because it made her realize how far she'd come without needing to be. The world no longer asked about her husband. They asked about her work, her opinions, her next move. And in every interview, she chose her words carefully. She didn't gloat. She didn't humiliate. She said things like, "When a woman finds her voice, it doesn't mean she's starting a fight. It means she's finally stopped apologizing. My silence once protected someone else's power. Now, my voice protects mine. I wasn't broken. I was simply unheard." Her words didn't trend. They transformed. She wasn't a meme. She was a movement. Then James Romeo called. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a clever message. It was his voice. Straightforward. Calm. Kind. "I'm proud of you, Lillian. but I miss the version of you that isn't always trying to be strong." She closed her eyes and let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I'm not trying," she said. "I just don't know how to be soft without breaking again." James didn't answer right away. Then, maybe the right person makes soft safe again? The dinner that wasn't a date. He invited her to dinner. No press, no business, just quiet. The restaurant was small, dimly lit, tucked behind a bookstore on the west side. Lillian wore black again, not because she wanted to hide, but because it made her feel untouchable. James stood when she arrived. He didn't kiss her cheek. He didn't reach for her hand. He simply pulled out her chair and said, "Thank you for showing up." And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like she was performing. That soft feels like. They talked about everything but Asher. About books. And music. And how neither of them remembered the last time they danced without worrying who was watching. At one point, she touched his hand lightly. And nothing happened. The world didn't fall apart. Her heart didn't panic. It was just quiet. And in that quiet, she felt something new. Not fireworks. This obsession. But peace. A fragile, unfamiliar, sacred kind of peace. And then, a message from Asher. "Asher Klein, you're glowing. I hope it's not too late to see that." She stared at the text. No anger. No pain. Just closure. As in reply. Because the past doesn't deserve access to a future it never built. The woman the world finally saw. It wasn't just Asher's wife. It wasn't just a headline. It wasn't just a survivor. She was Lillian. Just Lillian. And she was finally enough. Chapter 8. The divorce heard round the world. The envelope sat in the center of Asher Klein's conference table like a bomb disguised as paperwork. White, unassuming, deadly. Lillian had signed her name in black ink, no hesitation, no flourish. Lillian Eloise Carter. One last time. Only this time, it wasn't a signature of surrender. It was a declaration of freedom. The morning it hit the press, she didn't schedule a press release. She didn't hold a press conference. She simply uploaded one post. No filter, no caption. Just a scanned image of the signed divorce papers with her initials at the bottom and one sentence typed beneath. "Sometimes walking away is the bravest way to stay true." It trended within 10 minutes. Celebrities reposted it, influencers quoted it. News anchors debated whether it was the most graceful exit in high society history. But Lillian, she was at home, on her living room floor, barefoot, eating strawberries out of a mixing bowl and listening to Nina Simone. No tears. No regret. Just relief. Asher's office was a glacier. The board meeting had been rescheduled 3 times. When he finally sat down, half the room avoided eye contact. The other half pretended to be busy adjusting their cups. Only his grandfather dared to speak. "She left you in a single line of text," the old man muttered. "No payout, just dignity." Asher's jaw flexed. "She waited," he said flatly, "for 2 years. And what did you give her in return?" Silence. Then the old man added, almost wistfully, "She was the best thing that ever happened to this family." Asher didn't respond because he knew it was true. And he knew he hadn't lost her to James Romeo or the media. He'd lost her the night he made her feel invisible in her own life. James texted her the moment he saw it. "Oh, James, you didn't break. You walked away whole. To know tonight." Lillian replied. "Lillian? Not yet. I want to sit in the quiet a little longer." He didn't argue, because he understood. Sometimes healing doesn't look like dancing. Sometimes it looks like silence that doesn't hurt anymore. The interview she finally said yes to. It wasn't Oprah or CNN. It was a college journalist from NYU who'd written her a handwritten letter. Dear Mrs. Klein, I know you're not taking interviews, but I don't want to ask about your ex-husband. I want to ask about your voice. Lillian showed up to the campus coffee shop in jeans and a linen shirt. No entourage, no makeup artist, just her. The student trembled as she hit record. I guess I'm just wondering, the girl asked, how do you find your voice again after so long? Lillian smiled. You don't find it, she said softly. You remember it. And then, you forgive yourself for ever letting it be silenced. And then came the call. A producer from a major streaming network wanted to buy the rights to her story. I don't want my life to be turned into a sob story, she said. We don't want a sob story, the producer said. We want a rebirth. Lillian considered it, then said, only if I can write the final episode. The final conversation with Asher. It wasn't planned. They ran into each other at a charity gala neither of them wanted to attend. He was in black, sharp, alone. It was in ivory, soft, whole. Asher approached quietly. You look? She held up a hand. Please don't say beautiful, not tonight. He nodded. There was a beat. Then he said, you were never the problem. She sipped her wine. But I stayed, like I was. Asher's voice cracked. I didn't know how to love you the way you deserved. Lillian tilted her head, her voice calm. I didn't need you to love me perfectly, Asher. I just needed you to try when it wasn't convenient. He swallowed. And then, for the first time, he looked truly broken. I hope you're happy, he whispered. I already am. That night, she slept like a woman without secrets. No check waiting. No cameras watching. No lawyer on standby. Just her. Her name. Her body. Her breath. And a silence that no longer carried the shape of grief. Her last entry in the divorce journal. I once believed marriage was the finish line. But it was only the mirror. And sometimes the mirror cracks. Not because of betrayal or lies, but because the woman staring into it finally says, this is not who I want to be. The world didn't end, it unfolded. And she started her own production company. Hired women who had once been silenced. Old stories that didn't end with a man rescuing anyone, but with a woman rescuing herself. And when reporters asked her how it felt to be divorced from one of the country's most powerful men, she smiled gently and said, I'm not divorced from power. I simply decided to keep mine this time. Chapter 9. The question he never asked until it was too late. It was raining the day he showed up. Not the violent kind of rain, just the slow, steady kind, the kind that reminds you of everything that's already gone. Asher Klein stood outside the door of her new office, soaked through his collar, a man who'd never been denied a meeting now waiting without an appointment. Lillian didn't rush to let him in. She watched from the security screen for a long moment, studying his face. The dark circles beneath his eyes. A faint bruise of regret at the corners of his mouth. He looked human. We're all here. She buzzed him through. No words. No greeting. No silence. He sat in the chair across from her desk. She didn't offer him coffee. Didn't pretend to make small talk. She waited. Because for once, he'd come on her terms. And after a long beat, Asher finally said what he came to say. Did you ever love me? The room didn't move. Neither did she. He looked down, then back up, eyes bloodshot, voice low. I mean, not what we had on paper, not the boardroom marriage. I mean me. The version of me that didn't know how to love you right. Did you love him? Lillian stood slowly, walked to the window. Rain streaked the glass like memory. And then, gently, clearly, she answered, "Okay?" Asher closed his eyes. That word broke him more than any fight ever could. She continued, "I loved the boy who apologized without knowing why, who watched me sleep like he was memorizing safety, who read the back of cereal boxes aloud on Sundays just to make me laugh. Vi, that boy disappeared, and all that was left was a man too scared to choose me unless the whole world told him it was safe. He looked so small then. Asher had always filled a room, with presence, with arrogance, with control. But not now. Now he looked like a man undone. I didn't know how to ask, he admitted, how to be what you needed." Lillian nodded. "I know, but you never asked what I needed. That was the problem." Asher's throat tightened. "I thought giving you the world would be enough. You gave me a title, a wardrobe, a seat beside your ego." She turned to face him. "What I wanted was your heart, your attention. Your wonder, not your credit card." He swallowed hard. "Would it matter if I still loved you now?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Why, if you only learned it now that I'm gone?" Scene that played in his mind again and again. Their last night together. She'd worn gray, a soft sweater and socks, no makeup, hair undone. He'd barely looked up from his laptop. She'd sat on the couch, curled in on herself, staring at a flickering candle until it burned out. And he hadn't even noticed. That was the moment he lost her. Not the interviews. Not James Romeo. Not the signed divorce. But that night, and he stopped seeing the woman who stayed even after the love went quiet. The email he never sent. Later that night, back at his penthouse, the one that echoed now, he drafted it. "Project, I forgot to ask you this once, Lillian. I should have asked. What made you laugh? What made you scared? What made you stay all those nights when I was half a man with a full wallet? I don't want to win you back. I don't even know if I deserve to be remembered. But if there's anything left I can give you, it's this. Apology. My admission. My truth. I love you in the wrong way. And you still loved me, right? Until the day it broke you. I'm sorry I never asked what you needed to be happy. I'm sorry I assumed you were. I hope whoever stands beside you next never forgets to ask." Asher. He didn't send it. Some truths are meant for pages, not inboxes. And Lillian? And she never waited for the question. Because by the time he finally asked, she had already learned to answer it for herself. What do you need to be happy, Lillian? Answer. Not his attention. Not their last name. Not another apology. And she needed was the quiet self-worth of a woman who left before she was erased. Chapter 10. What love looks like when it's free. It started with nothing grand. Not a kiss in the rain. Not an airport chase. Just a knock at the studio door after hours. James Romeo stood there, a coffee in one hand and a small box in the other. No flowers. No promises. Just presence. You left your pen, he said quietly. Lillian blinked. That's not my pen. He smiled. I know, but I needed a reason to see you again. And they sat on the studio floor. The lights off. The city outside glowing like it was holding its breath. She sipped the coffee. He unwrapped the box. Inside was a simple silver bracelet. And no diamonds. No initials. Just a small engraving on the inside. She chose herself. Lillian's throat caught. You didn't have to? I didn't, James interrupted, but I wanted to. She looked at him. Why? He shrugged. Because you don't belong in a pedestal or a cage. You belong in a life that lets you be you. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she leaned forward and rested her head lightly on his shoulder. Not to be held, but to rest, to breathe, to simply exist next to someone who didn't ask her to shrink. They talked for hours about the smallest things. His worst childhood haircut, a favorite shade of size, the night her mother almost left but didn't, the morning his brother hugged him without words. Nothing urgent, nothing important. Because love, when it's free, doesn't ask you to audition. It just lets you be. No one was watching, and that was the point. He didn't post a photo. She didn't draft a caption. There was no PR team, no announcement, no diamond ring shot on a windowsill. Just her hand in his, walking down a quiet street past midnight. And every step felt like healing. A letter from Lillian to herself. She wrote it the night after she said yes to love again. Dear me. You didn't fail. You learned. You didn't lose. You let go. The version of you that begged for scraps is gone. The version of you that whispers, "I deserve better," is here now. And guess what? You don't need to be adored in public to be loved in private. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You don't need to be rescued. You are the home you always needed. Lillian. Her final broadcast of the season. She sat alone on set. No teleprompter, no cue cards. Just her. Camera rolling, red light on. She looked directly at the lens and spoke. This isn't a love story about getting the man. It's a love story about getting myself back. About standing in the mirror and recognizing the woman who finally stopped saying, "I'm fine." It's about the silence I used to sit in and call peace, until I realized real peace doesn't make your voice smaller. It's not about revenge, or making him regret it. It's about looking at the and feeling proud. She paused, then smiled, and wondering if you're watching this, and wondering if it's too late for you. It's not. If I could rewrite my story, so can you. The Cold Boy CEO. Asher watched the broadcast alone. No drink in hand. No tie around his neck. Just the sound of her voice on a screen too small for the enormity of who she'd become. He didn't call. He didn't text. He just sat there, learning too late what it looked like to love someone without owning them. The morning after didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like a continuation. Lillian woke up to soft light across her face, the smell of coffee in another room, and laughter, hers, echoing from the night before. James padded in barefoot, holding 2 mugs. Black, no sugar, like your resolve. She laughed and pulled him into bed by the sleeve of his t-shirt. You're ridiculous. He grinned. Why, you're radiant. And the ring? There wasn't one. Not yet. Because love, when it's free, isn't measured in carats. It's measured in consistency. In safe silence. In the way someone makes room for all the versions of you, even the ones still healing. So, what does love look like when it's free? It looks like a seat saved at the table for your own opinion. A goodbye that taught you more than the relationship ever did. A man who doesn't complete you, but celebrates that you were never incomplete. Fade out. No longer misses anyone, closes her journal. She places it on the shelf beside a coffee mug, a single pressed rose, and a photo of her smiling at a gala, unposed. Her voice narrates one final line as the screen fades to soft white. I didn't fall for the cold boy. I rose from him. And I never looked back. The woman she became. Lillian Klein was never just the wife of a billionaire. She was the girl who stayed silent too long. The woman who waited for someone to notice she was fading. The voice that once trembled behind perfectly applied lipstick and pressed riving smiles. But in the end, she didn't need to be rescued. And she needed to walk away. Not out of anger, but out of understanding. The version of love that made her feel small. is never love at all. And when she finally stood in the light of her own truth, she didn't ask for applause. She simply breathed. And that breath? That was freedom. That love really means. Love isn't about being chosen when it's easy. It's about being seen when you're messy, loud, scared, or brave. It's not the grand gestures or the million-dollar apologies. It's the quiet hand that reaches for yours without condition. The truth is, sometimes the person who teaches you what love isn't is the one who opens the door to what love can be. If this story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever stayed too long, spoken too softly, or loved too hard in silence, please share this story with someone who needs to be reminded. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to stay where you're unseen. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is leave with your head held high. Because love, when it's real, doesn't ask you to prove your worth. It whispers, "You already are."